Hello and welcome to the Brilliant People podcast by executive search firm Assertitude. I'm your host, Linnea Jungnelius. My incredible guest today is Erik Anderson, founder and CEO of WestRiver Group and vice chairman of Topgolf Callaway brands. WestRiver is a thematically driven investment platform that builds visionary companies across the global innovation economy. Erik is a transformative figure in business innovation, sports, entertainment, and philanthropy. Under his leadership, Topgolf skyrocketed to become one of the fastest-growing sports and entertainment brands globally, reimagining how people connect through play. Consistently ranked as one of Golf Inc.'s most powerful people, Erik is also a recognized visionary at Singularity University, leveraging exponential technologies to tackle some of the world's greatest challenges. Today, we'll dive into Erik's bold approach to innovation, his unique framework for enduring value creation, and his inspiring leadership philosophy. Erik, welcome to the show.
Lenny, it's great to be here. When you listen to that, my mom would be proud or something, but I don't recognize that person. Anyway, but
well, we're going to talk about your mom.
Here we go.
Yes. So let's start there, actually, Erik. You grew up in Spokane, Washington, where I've actually been at the Clearwater Paper Facility, believe it or not, with a mom you've called the original disruptor and an early love for chess. How did those personal experiences in your hometown shape your values as a leader and influence the path you've taken to build and invest in the global innovation economy?
Well, everyone has an origin story, so I have mine that I've really reflected on over the years. My mother, I have to give a little talk. So I was raised by a nurse. So my mother was a nurse, and I think it was the original disruptor perspective from my life is that she, this is in the 60s, being, a strong woman, and she had a nursing program inside a hospital. Mm-hmm. And at the time, that was a sort of a standard approach to, training nurses. She had a vision that nursing should be a 4-year degree and should rise to professional standing as well. So she actually shut down her program, which was the largest in Spokane at the time, and with the vision that there should be a college. And a long story short, she ended up going down to seeing the president of Washington State University. That was another friend of hers, colleague, and convinced them that, they should support building a 4-year nursing college. So for someone in that era, a mom, woman, nurse, and that sort of thing, and have that vision, and literally, we're going to shut mine down and be a leader, was an amazing story, and it did become, a very successful program. So we used to say, remember, her key thing was growing up was, we're fearless, we're not reckless. So I love that as a way of going forward, and it's, I think, a nice leadership model. Chess emerged in my life when I was like 6 with some neighbors, and I became sort of fascinated with that. My very best friend at the time, he and I became fascinated with the game. I didn't get that good. I got more transfixed by basketball at some point, but chess turned out to be equally enduring to that part of life. And that was really when Bobby Fischer came on the scene in 1972, and I think it was around there when he beats Pascal, but before that. And it was a personal journey with my best friend who did die of cancer early, like 11. So that was adversity or some tragedy. But we had a real love for the game, and it's continued to be sort of a hidden passion of mine along the way, just learning how to think in chess terms and how to apply as a way of describing business situations and leadership challenges as part of my repertoire. So both of those, the greatest game and then, a mother who had that sort of visionary courage were instrumental and foundational.
It's interesting you think of everything in chess, and I'm a runner, so I think of everything in terms of training for races, which also tends to work as a model for everything. So in chess, right, we're always thinking 2, 3, 4. You could probably tell me exactly how many moves ahead, right? I know that that's how you think about business as well. And you have this innovation streak in you, which I would guess is directly a result of having that forward vision. Have you always had that in you, or was there a pivotal moment or a decision that really set you on the trajectory to where you are today and how you think?
There's a couple lessons in chess, and people talk about the end game. You start in a position which always looks the same, which of course is not true in real life, but in the game. And then as you go along, you try to have an idea of, well, I can win by doing A, B, or C. And so sometimes you can look at a position and people say, I should be able to win from here. So winning is about playing good moves, but it's not a predictive. I couldn't possibly tell you, and I'm not this good, but even Magnus Carlsen, who's a good friend, best player in history probably, couldn't tell you what moves he's going to make to win, but he can probably tell you he can win. He still has to play well to win, but he believes he should win from here. So I think in business, when you set up your startup, you have your strategy, all these things, you believe you should win, which normally means just, getting market share. You don't win every move. Then you just have to play well. So the first thing in leadership sometimes when working with companies or teams, I try to see if they are in a position they should be able to win from. So that's one idea. Is this a winning position? The other thing that people stress too much about is I don't know everything that's going to happen to do, and that's impossible. But what you can do is when you look at a decision as a board, as a leader, or as anyone, you can say, if I'm in this position and I make this series of moves and I'm in a new position, maybe I have choices. I can be in position A or position B. One question you can simply ask yourself is, which position would I prefer to play the rest of the game from? So you're not trying to stress it and say, hey, I'm going to win from here, or I've won. It's like position A is better than B. When you do the eye test,
Yep.
Better, worse, you can think of, blocks of moves along the way of, better, worse, or you may prefer it as an individual leader that I prefer to play with a direct strategy, direct sales as opposed to, someone else selling for you, like agency sales. Those pictures, I think, are a good way to envision what's actually happening along the way. The biggest thing I would say is prediction is not the same thing as rigor, right? You can't really predict what's going to happen in business, but you can always be rigorous.
Right. The foundation is figuring out where you are. So doing the analysis to really understand where you're at and where you're at compared to maybe the market.
Mm-hmm.
That's the understanding and positioning them,
Exactly.
Right? And then it's about what's the next best step forward, figuring out what your options are, and then, executing with excellence to get there.
Exactly. But you can't predict all the moves to win.
Right.
So you have to let that go. And in business, to me, that's especially in today's age of exponential change.
Are you telling me we can't control everything,
Yeah, I know.
Erik?
I know. And I could tell right away you like to run. So it's a straight line, one step at a time. So you have to accept volatility the same way you might accept gravity. And if you don't think there's volatility, it's going to be really kind of a miserable experience because it just is. And of course, in public markets, that underlying volatility basically, flies in the face of, analysts are typically judged on their ability to predict.
Let's go back to this idea around rigor. I know you have a very intentional leadership framework where you balance things like branding and optionality and execution, and you're always encouraging teams to embrace the possible. Can you walk us through this model and share how you apply it when you're leading and scaling brands?
Yeah, absolutely. Like many things, this model or this unbundling of my leadership experience came from a not the best experience. I have a very dear friend, colleague, who is my partner, Gary Brinson. And the story has a really happy ending. So we had really good success together. We're great friends. We've known each other a long time. But we got to a place where there was a situation where we were in challenging things. And I was trying to communicate confidence in that I had answers, but I wasn't communicating clearly. That's like any relationship. It's like, don't worry. You tell your mom, your dad, your spouse, don't worry, honey, I've got this. And then you don't have it. And she said, I thought you had this. And it's like, well, I thought I had it, but I didn't. But you could have told me there was risk, right? Like you could have told me this could have happened. So on a serious note, when I looked at what was happening, and with Gary's help, I sort of unbundled first a way to look at a business, and then also two really important variables across it. So in terms of the structure, if our listeners could imagine, on the top is a box, it's called brand. And every company doesn't have to be, Oreos or something to have a brand, but everybody has a brand. The other side of it, just below that on the left side, would be something called execution, which is like, this is what we're doing today, right? We've decided we're going to build a factory or whatever. So that's actually what we're doing, execution. On the other side of this, beyond the brand box, is everything else we could do called options. So the first idea that's embedded there, one, there's a brand always, and then the value of a business is what you're doing and what you could do. And it always adds to one. So I always think of the thing that everything has to add to one. So you always want to be complete. So execution, you're doing it. Optionality, you could do it. And then underneath that, you could, a line is called IP and technology. But in my head is a little cloud underneath that, which is actually, this is kind of a new idea, first time talked about today. You want to be looking for your exponential engine, right? Because the world now, the fundamental curve is exponential that we're dealing with all the time, which means you have to adopt that. So recently I was working with my colleagues at Singularity saying everybody has to have an exponential engine. Either as an individual, a department, a division, a company, at all levels. And those things unbundled that way become very valuable. In the middle are the core values, the values of the company itself, whether you're Costco or Starbucks, like who we are in that regard. The other element we had is that, remember we talked about gravity and volatility. When you look at all the elements of your business, from your go-to-market strategy, cost structure, all these things, even rent, right? There's two things that I think are really useful to unbundle. One is our actual understanding of the element. And the other is what's the natural underlying volatility in that element that just happens. If it's sales and we miss sales by 2 days, we could have missed our plan. And if you have low understanding, which I would say in the startup world, or oftentimes in a volatile world, there's just low understanding and there's natural volatility, then predictability becomes not even maybe very useful, but rigor becomes incredibly useful. Because in the communication is, if we're talking now and say, there's real volatility here, but to be honest, I don't understand how this new thing called TikTok is going to affect how my audience grows and how that translates to sale. I just don't understand it. Going back to my relation with Gary, if we were looking at these things, had I unbundled those conversations into, I think this is the answer, but here's what I know and don't know, here's what the underlying volatility is, I think that's a much more complete conversation and much more honest. And so I find teams, when you break down to that and you use those ideas, completely and know where you are in those boxes, then it's a very fruitful and I think deep business conversation that becomes a great leadership voice. The insight around that is boards and everybody, we all get comfortable with the idea that there is volatility. And at the top, that every company has a brand. And it's really important at the board level to not confuse performance in this quarter with as a good result, although it could be, it could not be, depending on what we look at. But the conversation of the brand and the voice it's always having with customers, employees, capital markets, supply chains, always has to be elevated and reflected on both in those conversations all the time.
So let's break it down and let's jump to TOCA. Because I want to think about this framework in terms of that business. And for those who aren't familiar, TOCA was started by former U.S. World Cup midfielder Eddie Lewis and has grown into the largest network of tech-driven soccer training centers in North America. They're also behind TOCA Social, which combines soccer with dining and fun. And what really sets TOCA apart are those ball machines, digital targets, and that signature ball tracking line you see tracking every shot. So it's a whole new way to experience the game. Can you share a specific moment of TOCA when your leadership framework either led to a breakthrough or meaningful growth for the team or for the brand?
First idea that we had was sort of completing sports. So what Topgolf does and what TOCA does, it sort of completes the sports ecosystem. If you're playing soccer, most people stop playing at 13. You have to run a lot. Now, you love running, so you keep playing,
I don't know if I love it.
Yeah, well, that's a longer conversation. And you have to get a team and field, so it becomes difficult to continue to participate. This is true in many sports. So the first idea that we had was that TOCA completes it because it allows you to continue to participate. You can kick a ball and have fun with it without having to have a team and having to run all the time. But when we were working with the founders and thinking about this, and we came, and I have to say the truth, that I built one of the first TOCA studios because two of my children played high-level soccer. So I had an ulterior motive for trying to help them get great like Eddie Lewis was. But we really decided The first place was who we were and what was our identity. And at one point, the company was saying about we would just sell Toka machines. And when we got involved, and I got involved with founders and the founding investors, I said, I think it's better to own the experience. We weren't the machine, right? We were the experience. So that would be the first brand. And both are wonderful brands, and both can have brand promises. The machine promise would be obviously that it would work, right? And we keep improving it. And of course, the experience promise, might be you would get good, but you almost might have, a positive set of values instilled into you while you tried to get good, because pursuit is much more likely than outcome in sports. So the pursuit of being the best you can be is always better. So that was a place there. And then we started to unbundle the business, and we realized we had two big options. One was what we call Toka Soccer, which is training, and the other was Toka Social, which has the same theme maybe as Topgolf, which is you come and play and you put 5 people and do that. So immediately applying identity, which is the brand, and then identifying the options. We had 2. And then technology, right? We had IP. And we started to find, our exponential engine, right, was having the IP, but also being able to apply it, into social media activities like TikTok, et cetera. And then the culture really focusing that we wanted you to be your best. So we quickly unbundled across those elements.
Once you had the options, obviously just executing on it. So that would be the other box.
Yeah, that was execution. Yeah. So we identified we had one Toka, but 2 distinct brand experiences.
Right. And what about culture and values? Because I think you had that also as a bit of a foundation.
Right. Values are, as we know, best companies, best families, best everything operate on, a core set of values. So whenever you build a company, you want to establish those values almost in a democratic fashion, right? Which is the founders, and then, of course, the early participants in the brand, that we understand that this is the values of what we have. And then how you treat each other inside, so that we have what I like to think of an environment that has high intention all the time. That was a winemaker who came up with that idea. That's really good. We can't guarantee success, but we know we can always bring, high intention, to everything we do. So I respected that idea, and it was aspirational, but not silly. It's how we approach it.
Looking back now, is there a key lesson from that Toka growth journey that you think other business leaders or investors should keep in mind?
Well, we're really still early in growth. I think you just have to keep refining. And this is where rigor, whether it's Topgolf or Toka and these things, just the details, we keep cycling on execution, keep looking at the brand. How we do it matters, how we treat each other. But just recycling in details, going back to chess, a substitute for experience in chess is deep thinking. We try to think not to convenience, but think to completion. That's a really powerful idea for people, I think, to listen. We ask ourselves, were we complete? So completion is a harder effort than convenience. And recently, I'll give you an example of something that was probably knowable with deep thinking. We opened a new venue, and it was doing really well. And then we had a bad 45 days, like what is January, February. Well, that was funny, odd. We didn't expect it. But then in our region, and it was outside of London, it was Ramadan. And it turned out in our region, we had a significant population. And that's a religious holiday. It's observed, which is, of course, wonderful and totally respectable. But it stopped. They weren't coming to Toka.
Affected your business.
Affected business. And we're like, oh, and we said that, well, that was sort of volatility or is this or that. And I go, yes, and if we were thinking completely, we might have asked ourselves, does that population affect what happens? So every day in every way, just rigor and just like in chess, trying to understand the position even one better. And that's really like, okay, I understand it here, I'll make that move. It doesn't lose immediately, but had we spent more time and looked at it deeply, we might have found a better move.
Yeah.
And so it's just about how deeply you look into the position all the time.
When it comes to building powerful and iconic brands like you've done with both Topgolf and now with Toka, like you described, and many other businesses that you're involved with, what's at the heart of your approach to creating brands that connect really deeply with people, not just as customers, but as a community. And, how do you make a brand, quote, purposeful, right? And keep it ahead of the curve?
Well, I think you have to really find out, are you doing something important? And important can be really locally. It can be, your local ice cream shop. Our family, we have a little hamburger shop in Sandpoint, Idaho called the Burger Doc, or it can be important globally. But I think when you're looking as a founder, you want to find something that's important. Now, important generally means it's important to people. So, for example, something that's fun, why is that important? Well, it's actually important because play is actually important for people's mental health. People say, oh, you're just playing. I go, well, yes, but playing's important. So first of all, you have to find that idea. When we were with golf, we realized that golf was a tremendous convening sport. People came together, good, bad, or indifferent. It convened. It brought people together. And by the way, we iteration 4 times, all of them, all kinds of people. This is not me. This is the whole community of Topgolf. And we came up to, we create moments that matter, and we connect people in meaningful ways. So connecting and creating, those tend to be very active, deeply seated emotions and a sense of agency with people. So if our people got up in the morning and they go, what do we do? I had a very funny thing. I'll say this with some irreverence. I would be in front of folks and I say, I know you're here to create shareholder value, which means, there were 9 investors. Surprise, surprise. They were mostly wealthier white guys. And I said, I'm sure that's why we came every morning, because you want to make these guys richer. Right, you're laughing. We would all laugh, even the people listening. That can't possibly be true. And right, even though it's all about shareholder value and all this, but the brand has nothing to do with shareholder value, right? It's the promise between our people and the people giving us capital, but it's not our identity. So they would laugh at me to the point. I go, of course not, right? We're here to create moments that matter and connect these communities. That's why we're here. So you have to make that distinction. And then once you're there, right now people are empowered and they have agency and they have identity. I know who I am. I know what I'm able to do. And so that theme goes through all the choices, all the time. If you look at Toka, in some ways we do some of the same things, a different sport, but we're really getting people to be their best. Therefore, it's a journey, and we're trying to make that a positive journey. And of course, on the other side, people are playing and coming together, which is a core value. So that's, I think, you have to identify, big or small, you have to identify those things.
So if I'm a leader or entrepreneur or CEO, and I leave listening to this podcast, what I'm going to sit down and think about is fundamentally, what's the exchange with my client or my customer, and the why behind the why,
there's
right?
The books, all the why.
Yeah.
And it's, it's so fun. And I've had the good fortune to work with a new brand that's emerged, Colossal Bioscience. I got to spend some time with Ben Lamb and his team. And then they identify we're the de-extinction company. Some people may have heard that, the woolly mammoth, which is a brand expression, and the dire wolf and the woolly mouse that they've done. But this idea that at the highest level, we're the de-extinction company. I was here yesterday talking to a company called My Heart, which is a new formulation of baby formula, but fundamentally ground up, organic, and healthy, and it's taking off. But the founders, those are all things whether it's de-extinction or a healthy start, all things which are fundamental, big and small.
Maybe this is because you don't think about it, but I'm curious if you do. Do you think about brands solely in terms of your brand and how it connects with customers, or do you also think about it in terms of the competitive landscape of not only fundamentally here's what we provide for our end user, but also how that's distinct and different or more effective than other players in your market?
I think creation is always more valuable than competition. And I think in the era of exponential change, creation is much more valuable than competition because the space is available to create. You can just create them all the time. I do think in terms of competition for learning, but generally, that's a game of our market's getting bigger. Are you creating consumer choice? Or are you competing against a fixed pie? In a more linear, slower growing world, competition is more valuable because it doesn't change. So it's the same thing as, I played a lot of basketball, so I competed hard. The rules didn't change. The court didn't get bigger. Nothing happened. And so you want to get better at that because it's generally kind of not growing and it's linear. In today's world, it's so exponential. You want to be thinking of change and creation, I think, as much as you want to think about competition. And my good example is, would you rather know what Jeff Bezos is doing, or would you rather know what Jeff Bezos is thinking? Most people would say, I'd really rather know what he's thinking is next than what he's doing today.
That makes a lot of sense. And I would imagine even your feeling inside as a CEO or entrepreneur to that vision and that mission actually is what drives you to evolve and to better options in the future.
Yeah.
Even if everybody else is sort of thinking we do the same thing. But it is, at times, I think that passion and connection to it that helps and leads you down better paths. It makes you take better decisions.
Yes. And some of my colleagues out there know me because if you say, well, what would people either criticize you for or complain about? It's like, well, if you don't do a good job execution, you don't have this right, then of course you lose all future optionality, or you don't deliver enough value to your shareholders because you're creating. So all of those stakeholders matter, but it's called execution value for a reason, which means you must execute. So you have to learn as a company or as a person, right? You have to learn to execute.
Are there ways you've learned to better execute or align teams or operationalize some of these ideas that you could speak to or give away some thoughts around that?
I think a lot of people have done a lot better work on that than I have. I think words matter in leadership. So the fact that we call it execution value is almost at the highest level. So we have a brand and purpose, and we talk about execution value, and we talk about option value. Therefore, the first thing is it's front and center. And, you have to look at that. My view of the most important ways that I've seen about, execution value comes to focus, but then it really comes to cadence and rigorous learning. So when we were doing Topgolf and the team, we decided to meet every Saturday morning. It was 6 a.m. my time, like 8 a.m. there in Dallas, 1 hour, 90 minutes. I think in 2 years, I missed like 4 of those Saturday mornings. So the cadence and rigor of learning, and it was all about, all of our little model elements, who showed up, what the net promoter score was, everything, but just this rigorous cadence just about the execution side. Another whole day to talk about options.
Yeah. Just
what happened in the venue this week, and of course 1 week was 7 days, so ran a weekly pattern. I just think it's cadence, I think leads to really good execution.
That's a great word. You mentioned a lot of different companies. So I want to go to WestRiver Group, which you founded in 2002, and invest in technology, experience, decarbonization, and life sciences, backing purpose-driven companies that use innovation to improve society. What draws you to these sectors, and how do you identify companies that have both that strong business potential and the ability to create exponential impact?
So going back to the origin story for a moment, people say, why do you do what you do? So nurses care. I'd like to think that I care every morning. And obviously it kind of was literally immersive training about that. My mom had a care plan for everything. If I had the flu, we had a care plan. And my dad was like an amazing partner with my mom. And then the other thing that comes to mind when you're doing this is I like to think about, can I do the most for the most? I'm a little more attracted to scale. So I look for things that can scale and that can be meaningful. Like I said, play is important. Good healthy times are important. So Topgolf was sort of like that. Biotechnology and energy, they tend to be scalable. And I think they're important, in terms of what we do. So I kind of look at scale. I really believe, and I learned this again from Gary and my partners, that language really matters. Word choice matters. Execution value is more important than net present value or market value. Execution value ties to that thing, but actually execution was what I meant. So I think when you look at scale and these sorts of things, you're trying to find these things. So now this idea of the exponential engine, So in my own leadership journey right now, real time, because I was just talking about that, people say, oh, it's exponential change and disruption. I go, but as a human, as a leader, what we're looking for now is, and the tools are there, both creation, but also the application. Now it's creation and application. I look for the exponential engine. And that takes so many different ways. So it can be a breakthrough in a formula for yogurt, coupled with a brilliant TikTok strategy, using Square so you don't have to have any equipment. Those are the elements of rapid growth that you could do a lot of things, but you got to find that exponential engine. And then culture-driven, strong leaders with values that pull that together.
I'm happy you mentioned leaders because that is where I'm going next. You've built...
I'm like a good guest on a night's show, right?
Exactly.
Look at this, you do so well.
You've built teams known for being both, high-performing and diverse. And so what is your approach to finding and nurturing talent that can really thrive in these innovative and entrepreneurial environments that you tend to create?
Well, along the way, you've learned just a lot of things from people. So I like to think of myself and ourselves a little bit as humble and enthusiastic. You don't want to be around people who aren't humble. And enthusiasm could be confused for things which are not humble, but you want to be enthusiastic. Ken was a very senior leader at Federal Express, and he came and worked with us at Topgolf. And he exposed me to this event called Team Trek, which was sort of built by Federal Express, which is not something new. But that was really all kinds of purpose, and the big thing there is you're never a victim. So I learned a lot about creating environments. I've translated that into safety is very important. Safety does not mean it's not rigorous. It means safe. So a cornerstone for building high-performing teams is that you want to create a safe and rigorous environment. And safety is really foundational. That means people can speak their mind. They can make mistakes. Doesn't mean they're not accountable. Accountable means I made a mistake, not blaming it on someone else. So a lot of other words. But I think safety is at the core, oddly enough, of high performance, especially when we don't have deep understanding, we're starting something new, and there's a lot of volatility. It's irrational to ask them to say, you must be able to tell me what's going to happen 3 weeks from now. There's just nothing really good about that or fair. That's just pushing risk somewhere. So I think you've got to have, safety. And then people will just learn to act on what we call principles. So one of my colleagues, we rank order how decisions get made. Are they made by principle? Are they made by preference? Are they made by politics? Or are they made by power? If you ask those 4 questions every time, and I think it's a great game to play, I'll tell you, walk into your next meeting and have everybody there and start the meeting with, what principles are we using today to make our decisions? That will really slow down the team in a very good way. Well, today's principles are on net present value.
Yep.
Long-term vision, or, I don't know. If you look at the world or any situation as a leader and you say, in my view, principle is always the best decision, right? So we're connecting and creating. If we're making decisions today that create connection in meaningful ways and create moments that matter, we know that's going to flow through the rest of the organization every time. It will never steer us wrong, ever, right? If it's preference, I'd really like to run the next Topgolf site or the next Toka site. Great, that's ambition. That's your preference. Am I the best person? That's principle. Right? Politics. Linnea and Joe would, I'd really like to work with Joe on this because I know Joe will bring me along to the next thing. That's politics. This is what we're going to do. That's power. Rank order those. Look at the world today and figure out how people are making decisions. Think they're making them on principle or you think they're making them on power? We know the answer. The world is better on principle than power companies are better on principle. But we break them into the 4 Ps.
I like that 4-piece decision framework. What about systematizing and cascading safety? Is there a framework or a way that you do that?
Not as far advanced as I would like. Origin story again, I realized I grew up in a very not a wealthy environment, in fact, far from it. Lots of turmoil. My dad faced brain health issues, friends, all kinds of challenges. but still always safe. So I underestimated the importance of safety because I wasn't always right, but I was always safe. And I was encouraged, right, to do these things as long as we were trying to do it for the right reason. So I think systematizing safety is work in progress for me. But there are good principles out. It's not to say that we don't do anything. One thing is to always think in your mind, is this safe? Am I putting someone on the spot, or am I trying to learn? Am I being rigorous, or am I weaponizing? My favorite word for a non-safe environment is people weaponize something to get to a place. So Bob didn't get his answers right. He didn't get his numbers. We can't trust Bob. We should do X. That's pretty ugly. Happens all the time. The question is, this happened. What did we learn? Was it just volatility? Did we learn? Can we learn something, et cetera? Or it's a systematic problem, and it is Bob. That's a principled approach to the conversation, but you have to fight weaponizing. It happens all the time.
Right. So that's a bit more on like the culture and, almost more on like the people side of things. And I would imagine also kind of ties back to like who you hire in the first place, right? And the assessment and what you look for on your scorecards for, your C-suite and then,
Everything.
folks under that and, as you trickle down into the organization.
But safety versus weaponization, and you'll see weaponization all the time, and then realize that who's running the current biggest execution. I think about my thought leadership team is not always the same as my execution team. But oftentimes the execution team, because they have all the revenue and they have all the profits and all those sort of things, or they're the presidents of the divisions, they're so focused on that, and they oftentimes get overweight that the execution can really make it hard to have the conversation about risk-taking.
Let's talk more about the great CEOs of today. What defines them in your view, and what are the commonalities amongst the entrepreneurs that you bet on? Obviously, we've touched on a couple of things, so we can skip over those, but are there other traits you pay attention to?
I think they have to be very agile, in today's world. Here's a little tidbit I thought.
No kidding.
No kidding, right? Well, I know we say it, but that's, we have an academic system, right, that suggests that you should get 90% or above is good, and like 90%, that's oppressive, right? I have no idea how to get 90% right of anything. Just in the morning, I don't think I get 90% right before I walk out the door. So what's interesting to me, the sort of little tidbit, if you go back and look at the most valuable companies today, and you said, what was their lowest stock price as a public company? Apple was basically zero. Because remember, Steve Jobs came back and Microsoft made money, so it was almost zero. Mm-hmm. Amazon was certainly below $2, had debt. People didn't think it was going to make it. NVIDIA, I believe, was 30 cents. Meta was below 7 or 6, a recent one. Other than Microsoft, almost all the most valuable companies in the world, when they were public, traded at extremely low valuations. Now, if you go read those founders, those leaders' reports or quarterly reports, because they were public, right, you wouldn't think that anything really bad was happening. So accepting, volatility, accepting that it's not up and to the right, understanding where you place the accountability, for those volatile results, understanding that you're building understanding, having faith like in those underlying ideas. I think that's just, it's a very thoughtful but still ambitious, aspirational point, but with really, really, really incredibly deep rigor.
So great rigor and then sort of this steadfast belief.
Yeah, but it's based on certain kinds of analysis. And of course, then they absorb losses, and of course, they move on. Bezos, his S team was like 17 or 20 people, was there for a long time. There's no way that all of those people were there because they never made mistakes. They had incredible failures, right? I mean, they had this like fire notebook or whatever it was. They had all these things, right? It's like terrible, terrible ideas, right? But not a team you would break up. Just a bad idea. Maybe they executed bad, and we moved on. I think Jeff, I have regard for him, and like I don't know him, so I'll say Jeff because everyone in the world says, well, Jeff, right? I think the leaders know what to absorb, and they understand if there's high intention. Is this team still performing even if we make mistakes?
It's kind of this idea of failing forward.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
We've spoken a lot about exponential change. And so I want to get into your work with Singularity University, which is all about preparing leaders for this future shaped by rapid advancement and technological disruption. How do you help companies and boards move beyond seeing change as a threat and instead embrace it as a catalyst for innovation, for growth? And what sorts of mindsets or strategies do you believe are essential for leaders, specifically when they're navigating the future of business?
I think...
And maybe give a little more about what Singularity is for those that don't
Singularity
know.
had, I think it's 14 years old now. It was founded by two really fantastic visionary people, Ray Kurzweil, who wrote the book The Singularity and is a clear futurist, recognized as such, clear leader for AI, has been right on some interesting things. And Peter Diamandis is also a visionary leader, wrote the book Abundance. And, they fully embraced and recognized early that we were on an exponential curve. And then, of course, Google supported them. And it really was focused on, if there's an exponential curve and you believe it, then what are the implications of that? How do you prepare for that? How do we actually prepare leaders? So the Singularity University, because we're not 4 years like Stanford or Harvard or something, but the idea was, and the insight that Ray and Peter had, was actually that they would accumulate curriculum for 9 months, and then you would come in for 3 months. They found incredibly bright people from all over the world, brought them together for 3 months and said, hey, here's what you need to know. And that was the rate of pace of change. And sure, it was very important to understand all the foundations. And so we're going to do algebra, we're going to do calculus 3, whatever we're going to do. I did all that in school. Not that you can skip all of that, but in a way you could skip a lot of those things and focus on these things. So that's the first thing, is recognition that it is exponential. And that is totally unnatural. The second thing is you actually learn to trust that the exponential environment will deliver things that you need. It'll get there in time. It's risky, but I think, again, every day we're seeing more. So you actually have to accept that, and you have to accept, in my opinion, you have to accept high volatility as a reality. And we just repeat that over and over. I think Elon is a great example of those things. And I think if you look at the world, the trillion-dollar value companies are on the West Coast because they didn't pay attention to volatility. Stock prices near zero. They would take lots of risks, lots of failure. They trusted the capital markets would show up, even though sometimes low. Difficult environment for investors, so you have to be super sophisticated as an investor. But you have to absorb that and accept it.
So, Erik, as we start to wrap up, and you think about the legacy you want to leave in business or beyond, what matters most to you?
I think if you can leave, so you start with your family, you have children. So if you leave people who are good people and are doing good things, if you can leave some thoughts or ideas that sort of build on the body of knowledge, whether it's, of leadership, et cetera, if you can influence the lives of some leaders who are maybe doing good work, and you play a role in that as a mentor. And then if you've found important companies and you've helped them, in my case, really connect to the global capital markets in a way, really leave some principles in place, maybe this model thinking, the ideas we talked about, maybe those really help guide them, then years from now, you'll see the fruits of that. You'll see from Topgolf, we see people in strong leadership positions, but leading with principle. We're working on companies right now, like being to work with Ben a little bit at Colossal was fantastic because, they've de-extincted the first animal, right? So that's good. Lumen Bioscience, changing the cost curve for the future of global health, making it affordable, having the first people who could have 1 billion customers. So you'll see pods of influence where you can think, I push that forward a little bit.
Influence and impact. Yeah. So in each episode, we like to leave by defining brilliance in a few ways. So I'm going to hit you with a quick Lightning round. The first one is purpose is.
Purpose is passion and insight.
Leadership is.
Leadership is principle and conviction.
Success is.
Success is others doing better.
Brilliant leaders are.
Brilliant leaders are humble, thoughtful, and courageous.
I perform at my best when.
I perform best when I'm inspired by the future of others.
Erik, thank you for an incredible conversation. Your insights on leadership, on brand building, and innovation are invaluable. We'd love to have you back soon.
Well, it's been an honor to be here.
Thank you again to Erik Anderson, founder and CEO of WestRiver Group and vice chairman of Topgolf Callaway Brands, for joining us today. I hope you're leaving inspired with practical insights to elevate your leadership, your brand, and your innovation for the future. And thanks to you, our listeners, for joining us on this episode of the Brilliant People Podcast. I'm Linnea Jungnelius. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show, and follow Assertitude on LinkedIn for more insights to help you lead and perform at your best. Until next time, stay brilliant at work. And as Erik might say, work with high intention.